Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Deer Talk Now is coming at you once again. Every Thursday, we come up with a brand new episode for you, so just check them out wherever you're listening to a podcast or watching a podcast, YouTube, Facebook. All we ask you to do is like and subscribe. Today's guest is a guest we've had on before. He's a friend of ours, Jonathan Kaiser. He's a conservation officer here in Wisconsin. Jonathan, welcome again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. Appreciate it.
We had a lot of views in the last time we had you here.
Oh,
and
cool.
I thought that was kind of neat because you have the distinguished honor of being the only warden so far, and now you've got two.
Really? Oh, boy.
Two
Yeah.
episodes. So
That's awesome.
you got to put that as a feather in your cap.
I do appreciate it. Yeah, that's great.
Well, thank you for taking time out. I know your life is extremely busy this time of year.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little bit about it off the air. You know, we just got through with our Wisconsin gun hunt, which is an annual thing. I think we have 700 some thousand gun hunters. And that's the same for every state, whether it's Minnesota or Michigan or Pennsylvania or Texas or Alabama, Georgia, Florida. Gun season I've always called the big hammer because that's what helps manage deer herds.
Right.
But as a warden and officer, how is it for you? What does gun season mean? Is it stressful, or is it just every day? You've been doing this for several years now.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely can be a little stressful, tiring, all of the above, just because, especially here in, what I like to call Deer Central, Wapaka County, as we both know, Dan, this week and I should say the week of gun season is my busiest of the year, just running from one thing to the next, and you kind of never know what'll be around the next corner. But it's a really fun time of year. I mean, a big part of the reason I became a warden is because I like to hunt myself. Of course, I'm a gun deer hunter when time allows. And, just enjoy being out there with folks as well as doing my job, protecting people and the resources. So it's a busy, tiring time of year, but, it's good. It's good.
What is a typical day for you? I know you started getting pretty heavy in September, but take us through, what is a typical day? Are you up all 24 hours? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. The simple answer is, at least in the life of a warden, there's really no typical day, which is one of the great parts about the job. There's certainly days where we are up very long hours in the middle of the night, all day long. It really depends on what's going on or what complaints we're receiving. Our schedule, frankly, unlike much other law enforcement officers, is very much on us to determine when we're out, but then of course we're also expected to be out when we need to be. So I know the week leading up to the gun deer season, I've had quite a few long days working into the night some nights. Really depends, again, on what cases are going on, or unfortunately when we have hunting accidents or incidents, we have to make sure that we're dedicated and sticking to that till, the investigation's done.
And I know how it is for wardens in America. It's been basically, I don't want to say this in front of you, but it's kind of a burnout curve for some guys.
Sure.
A lot of hours, understaffed.
Yeah.
Wisconsin, I know we're using our state as an example, but I know we have 72 counties. There's about 200 wardens. So a tad over 2 wardens per county, but I know it doesn't work that way. You have regions that you work. And I know this is nationwide. How is it even possible for 1 or 2 guys to handle all this stuff?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I would say, first of all, we've been very fortunate and blessed as an agency to, for the most part, be able to keep up with the turnover. We're hiring, maybe as a shameless plug, Dan, 10 to 20 great people every year.
Listen to that. If you guys are young and you need a job, listen to him. And I know that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And on our DNR website, myself included, I'd be happy to talk with anyone, but our DNR website's got a really great warden recruitment webpage that talks from A to Z about what someone needs to do to set themselves up. But recruitment's, of course, a huge focus right now. Maintaining our standards, certainly, but trying to recruit good people. At the same time, there's kind of been, maybe like we're seeing in the hunting world in general, somewhat of a paradigm shift as far as how many people hunt for what reasons over time. Obviously, recruitment of hunters is a huge push we share in common, Dan, of course. But I think it's just kind of realizing that there's only so many of us. I cover half of this county. I can't be everywhere at once. And I mean, the simple answer that I tell, to all of my safety courses, anyone who will listen, is that we're all in this together. I know a lot of times there's maybe perhaps the rumor mill or mentality of, the DNR or the wardens versus the rest of the world. I can't do my job without working with the local community. And I think most people understand that, and I'm very grateful for that. So it's kind of a combination of things, as well as, you talked about the burnout curve. Largely that's on us, meaning, back in the olden days of wardens, they worked all 9 days, like you said, probably darn near 24 hours a day. And culturally, that's changed. And I'm glad to say that our agency, and I think the world we live in now, is much more aware of wellness, meaning, we can only get to what we can get to. Oftentimes, we can catch up with whatever we need to do after, and just really try to maintain wellness and, frankly, not leave our families and friends in the dust.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So how does that work? Is it like being a police officer? Do you have a dispatcher telling you, like, hey, there's some guy poaching off of XYZ road, or is that how that works? Or are you just getting that fed to you, or do you have to go to is there a station that you have to go to? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, no, really good question. So each state may be a little bit different, but of course, speaking here for Wisconsin specifically, we do have a DNR dispatch, which we formally call our DNR tip hotline, 1-800-847-9367. You may be familiar. You can call or text it, available 24 hours a day. And I always like to jokingly / not jokingly say that they will call me at 3 a.m. Wow. They will call me on Christmas Day. That's to say it is very effective. So anyone and everyone can call that number, be confidential.
Is that call, if I'm calling that, am I calling you, or am I calling some?
Yep. To call that number, you are calling a dispatcher. Okay. You're calling a switchboard, most commonly out of Madison, but they will find either myself or an on-duty warden in that area to relay the call to them as soon as they get it. Well, when we...
or do they weed them out a little bit?
If a call comes in and there is a suspected violation, they send them out. Yep. And so then it's up to us to work through, is there anything here? How big of a deal is this? Is this something that's urgent we need to deal with right now? Or can this be investigated down the road? So largely it's up to us. I will say, to my knowledge, our hotline, if they get it, they send it along.
Wow.
Yep.
What are the most common violations right now? We're talking November, December.
Yeah. Yep.
For deer hunting, what are the most common violations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say I can speak for Wisconsin statewide for the most part. It'll depend, depending on the region and the area, what resources there, as well as what laws are there, meaning some counties, of course, still allow baiting. Some here in Wapaka, we don't. I would say for me, illegal baiting or feeding of deer and other wild animals is probably far and away the most common call I get. I could designate 40 plus hours a week every week during the fall to that.
Just going off of those calls?
Yep. This year especially, for some reason, we've had what I would call an increase in poaching. A lot of people ask me, hey, John, is there a lot of poaching going on? And everyone kind of defines that differently. In this case, we've had a lot of shine shoot incidents, people going out shining deer, shooting them with bows, crossbows, and guns. We've had a number of deer shot, especially bucks during the rut, shot with rifles around here, but statewide this year, for a variety of reasons.
Is that just somebody calling it in? Like a resident, they heard a gunshot or they know that happened?
Yep. Yeah. Generally speaking, it's going to be someone doing the right thing and calling it in, whether it's to the hotline or to your previous question. Over time, we form relationships. People trust us, know they can be confidential, and they'll reach out to us directly, or they'll call our partners, such as like the Wapaka County Sheriff's Department, who will relay that to us. Yeah.
So you're only dealing, and I know this is different in other states, you're dealing with wildlife violations. You don't deal with trespassing situations?
Yeah, good question. So in Wisconsin, we deal with a really wide array of natural resource-related violations. But we here do not specifically have trespass jurisdiction, even if there are certain ties with hunting. What I will say is if someone believes there's some DNR related matters or violations, oftentimes there is with these trespassing incidents, let us know. But that would be the local sheriff's department or local municipality who handles that.
I got a ton of questions for you.
Sure.
Let's go back to the baiting situation. I know that's a tough one, or a big one.
Sure.
Take us through that. You get a call. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so it can be handled a number of different ways. Typically what we'll get is a call that, to use a very generic name, John Smith down the road, I think they are putting out, or I saw pictures of them putting out a 50-pound bag of corn, which for those who are not from, Wapaka County or from Wisconsin, essentially anything that's put out from a liquid attractant, granular attractant, mineral blocks, corn, apples, sugar beets, you name it. Any feed or attractant that's put out to hunt for or feed deer is generally not allowed. So a couple of different options, assuming this is someone that we've never gotten a complaint on before, which, believe it or not, I've had people who I've worked with, if you want to say that, 2, 3, 4 times where we're just continuing to have an issue. But let's say this is the first time. Oftentimes what we'll do is we'll follow up depending on what information is provided to us, and we'll either contact or talk with them directly, knock on their front door. Hey, we got this information. What's going on here? And work through it from there. Obviously, their cooperation goes a heck of a long ways. We're again, oftentimes hunters ourselves and reasonable people. I will say here in Wisconsin, we are able to check those sites, meaning go on private property when we do have a complaint, fully realizing that is an important issue, and we take private property rights with the utmost importance, but also the public generally expects us, right, to do our job when we get a call. So as uninvasively as possible, we will oftentimes check those bait sites so that we know what we're talking about, we verify the violation, and then follow up with the responsible parties from there, whether it's talking with them at their house, over the phone, or as probably quite a few people learned the opening day of this gun deer season, we go and meet them out at their stand.
So, give me an example. Have you ever had somebody get belligerent on you? You just show up and they're in their stand. Give me an example. You don't obviously not naming names, but
yeah, I would say it happens somewhat commonly. Emotions can run high. People are out in the place they enjoy, right? They're out in their stand, out in the woods hunting, oftentimes with family and friends. I would say it's fairly common, to paraphrase any number of ways it's said, what the heck are you doing here?
This is private property,
right?
Or something.
Yep,
and you're like, well,
exactly.
I'm a warden.
Yeah, and so I think like anything, and now we've talked a couple times here on this podcast, you can see generally how I am, Dan.
Yep.
Obviously if I have to get maybe a little more aggressive as part of my training, that has to happen.
I can't see that, but
I
haven't seen that part of you yet.
Yeah. What I will say is I feel like our approach, both personally and professionally, goes a long way. Well, hey, Joe Smith, the reason I'm here is about your corn pile right there. A lot of times that, believe it or not, de-escalates things pretty quickly. Oh yeah, that, yeah. Or it's, hey, I'm out here doing my job. We got a complaint. What is your understanding? Because I always tell people we're the fact finders, right? What is your understanding of the baiting and feeding laws? And most commonly, it's, yeah, I know I shouldn't be out there, but there's a lot of confusion out there. And obviously we take that into account. I really think, again, making sure that I and everyone who's at that location at that time is as safe as possible. Just being personable and communicating is huge.
Has anybody ever taken it up a notch on you?
Yeah, we've certainly had that before. Where we're having to take extra precautions, going in with multiple wardens, certainly.
Really?
Oftentimes we run into folks.
Dragging them out in cuffs? Or?
Sometimes,
really?
depending on the circumstances.
Holy moly.
Yeah,
wow.
and I wouldn't say, I will say not necessarily just for baiting, but, Dan, we run into felons in possession of firearms, people who have warrants, people who, believe it or not, are under the influence of a number of controlled substances, and then obviously that escalates things from there and can really influence their judgment. Wow. So yeah, as you can see, we're equipped and trained like any other officer,
like a cop.
Yep.
Now,
yep.
Have you had anything where you were kind of scared, like any situations where it got kind of hairy?
Yeah, no, there's definitely been some situations where it gets a little sketchy. Yep, for sure.
Dang, that's crazy. I suppose I was going to circle back to you, and you talk about, because when we say poaching, most of us you think like, yeah, that's the guy driving at night.
Yep.
With a rifle in the car. Those gotta be pretty scary.
Yeah.
Like when especially you're apprehending somebody.
Right.
They might have a loaded rifle in the vehicle.
Yeah.
They've shot a deer. Have you actually caught somebody in the act doing that?
Yeah. Yep. It doesn't happen all the time. A lot of times we end up catching with them after the fact. But yeah, I've had it a couple times, and to be honest with you, it kind of is a little bit memory lane or makes your hair stand up a little bit. Yeah, thinking back to those moments where, like you said, frankly, a lot of times we're short on sleep. It's the middle of the night, and like you said, you just saw what you saw. Let's say someone shined, you heard or saw a gunshot. Who am I about to walk up on? Including in some instances folks that I've contacted before and probably aren't my biggest fan.
Wow.
So obviously what we call officer safety, as well as frankly everyone's safety, theirs included, is number one. So taking things one step at a time, trying to slow things down as much as you can, and frankly calling in backup. There's been a couple instances very similar to what you're talking about where fortunately even in a more rural county like this, I've had 2 to 5 other officers on scene in short order just to make sure things are safe and under control. But yeah,
police officers?
Yes, police officers, other wardens if
Sheriff's
they're in
deputies.
the area, sheriff's deputies.
So you get a situation like that, you're other law enforcement's going to help.
Correct. Yep. We're all in it together. I try to help them as much as I can with domestic violence incidents, drunk drivers, you name it, and they certainly are great about helping me with our end of things.
Wow, that's something. I mean, that's something that. Well, I've seen the show Wardens. I mean, that's
sure,
something that would be like an episode for that. So we talk about, and like I said, I know different states have different laws, but here we're kind of unique. I know in Minnesota, where you lived for a short time.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but in Minnesota, if you shoot a deer and it goes on your neighbor's property, you have the lawful right to go get it.
Yeah, unless that's changed, that was here, how it was.
Here, that's not the case.
Correct. Yep.
Here, basically, trespassing is trespassing.
Yep.
But you guys don't enforce that.
Yes.
So
correct.
what happens during gun season, especially? Small properties. I mean, we're talking. I know guys in Pennsylvania, Michigan can relate to this. 10, 20 acres. You shoot a deer, it's going to be on the neighbors.
Right.
You probably get a lot of those calls.
Yeah, we do get quite a few calls.
How do you
about
handle
that.
those?
Yeah. So. That's a really good question. I would say in those instances, kind of as part of being woven into the community as we are in every area of our job, we are essentially the mediators, meaning here in Wisconsin, despite what some folks may think, although we do have the ability to access private property in the course of our job, we don't have the ability or don't make it our business to go and retrieve other people's deer and other people's private property. So essentially, the best rule of thumb, as I'm sure you know, Dan, and I tell all of our hunter safety courses, is form relationships, ask permission way ahead of time. We're hunting deer, we're hunting wild animals. We got to try to plan for those inevitables, but those things will happen. So we try to serve as the mediator and just help level heads prevail, through what I like to jokingly say is the deer drama, especially when antlers are involved during the heat of the gun deer season. Again, emotions can run high. So we try to work through it. No one likes deer to go to waste, and a lot of times just, hey, you may have had X, Y, or Z in the past, not seen eye to eye, but let's work through this. And I would say more often than not, we're able to come to a good outcome.
And what you said there too is you gotta know your neighbors.
Right.
If you don't know your neighbors,
you're
gonna set yourself up for a situation like that.
Yep.
What is our law? You and I have land next to each other. I shoot a big buck, it runs onto yours, and yours dies. Can you tag it?
Yeah, good question. So the simple answer is no.
Really?
If you did not shoot or harvest that deer, you cannot tag it, even if it ran onto your own property. So this is where, and this is frankly part of the talking point when I'm serving as, if you will, that mediator, that, hey, legally at that point, it's the persons who shot it, but of course without permission, they can't go get it. That doesn't allow anyone else to tag it.
Wow.
And essentially it reverts back to the state, which means the people, right? The people of the state of Wisconsin, and largely would go to waste.
Have you ever dealt with one of those situations?
Yeah. I mean, again, I get calls about this quite often. I would say, fortunately, very, very, very rarely does one of those deer go to waste, and we are able to work through the situation and get it to the rightful owner.
But what I'm thinking of is, like, let's say it's a 200-inch buck.
Yeah.
I shoot it on mine. There's an obvious blood trail. It runs onto yours. Have you ever dealt with, like, that guy tagged it? Have you ever had that situation?
Yeah, yep, we have.
Really?
I see what you're saying. I would say not often, but we do run into that. And I would even say during the archery season, and like you said, usually it revolves around nice bucks.
Yep.
But yeah, generally speaking, we will follow up and, of course, talk with the person who we believe tagged the deer, registered the deer, has it, and see what their understanding is. You know, in some cases it will be, well, I thought it was on my land and I have a license. Otherwise, you know, they knew better, and we end up having to talk with them about the unlawful possession of that deer. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's common where that it gets to that point, but it does happen where they're, oh, I never saw it, and then lo and behold, you know, there's a Facebook picture, or there's scuttlebutt in the neighborhood that they did end up with it.
How common is that you're using social media?
I would say, you know, especially through tips that are brought to us, I would say they come in through that quite a bit.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. You know, just like someone posts something and someone in the public sees it and just like, I don't think this quite looks right. So then they'll let us know. You know, again, it goes without saying, technology has advanced so much in the last 10, 21 year. I mean, it's advancing at an incredible rate that as technology advances in the hunting world, it certainly also gives opportunities for people to, frankly, put things out there that they shouldn't be doing, and we get tips on that, certainly.
What about roadkill deer? Do you deal with them, or is that left up to law enforcement?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We deal with them from the perspective that our DNR system tracks them. It's very much been simplified the last few years, as you probably know, here in Wisconsin. In other states, certainly it could be different. But essentially, if you hit a deer and you want to keep it, you have the first claim to it, and essentially you can keep it. It's supposed to be entirely taken instead of just, you know, cutting off the antlers or cutting off a portion of it. And then essentially you either go online to our DNR website or call it in at a number that's listed on that DNR.
So you don't have to call somebody to get a tag
No,
anymore.
not anymore. Essentially, very similar to our deer registration system for deer harvest. You call it in within 24 hours, and it's registered. We keep track of it. I think the insurance companies like to know about that data. And yeah, then it's yours to keep. And then if the person who hits it doesn't want it, basically first come, first serve.
First come, first serve. I see a deer.
Yeah.
I'll never do this again because I've taken like, I think I could tell you stories right there. Three or four over the years.
Okay.
Never do it again.
Sure.
It is so not worth it. But somebody's driving, and I know you guys are going to correct me on this because a lot of guys say, oh, yeah, I could save the backstrap, whatever. You're driving along, you see a deer. You just have to, you could just throw it in your truck and register it?
Yep.
You drive it home and register it? Or do you have to register it before you take it away?
It has to be registered essentially within 24 hours of it being picked up.
You guys really made it simple.
Yeah, yep. But preferably, you know, it's like anything in life, whether registering a deer you harvested or picking up. Life happens, we get busy and sometimes forgetful. I would say if at all possible, do it immediately right away, as soon as you pick it up. Yep.
I think that's common sense. Deer Talk Now is brought to you by Mossberg. Mossberg has been supplying American hunters with quality firearms for over 100 years. Over the years, they've upheld their commitment to innovation by creating a handful of firearms that have shaped the way we hunt today. For more information, visit mossberg.com. How much have you been dealing with deer disease at all?
I would say I don't as much directly, as opposed to our wildlife biologists who do a great job trying to keep track of that. Obviously
But
there's.
you don't get call. I'm sorry to mean to cut you off.
Sure.
You don't get calls saying, "Hey, there's a deer walking around in circles over here in the Fleet Farm parking lot or whatever."
Sure.
Did you get
Actual call.
did you get calls like that or?
Yes, we do. I would say
But
those
you have
kind
to
of.
respond to them.
So, yes, it depends. I would say depending on when the call comes in and what is exactly going on, is this a deer literally running around in the Fleet Farm parking lot? Or, and you laugh, we've had deer that get into houses, businesses, different things like that, and they don't seem to be acting right besides being in that building. Depending on the nature of it, we, the wardens, will respond. Otherwise, we try to work hand in hand with our wildlife partners, because that is going to be the main focus of their job is wildlife health, disease, everything like that. And we're kind of the Jills and Jacks of all trades. So yeah, we get those calls, sick deer, all the time in this county. And again, try to work with our wildlife folks for them to be kind of the first line of response.
Any uptick in that you've seen in reports of diseased deer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say here in Wapaka County, fortunately, it seemed to be pretty stable, pretty average, if you will, which still is pretty common. But as far as the big one, right, CWD, chronic wasting disease, no new positives that I've heard of, but we have, since finding a couple wild positives, tried to ramp up our testing. And again, that's largely led by our wildlife program. Otherwise, as I'm sure many folks know, oftentimes CWD is the poster child for wildlife disease, but just like humans, right, deer can get any number of different diseases, illnesses, things that, affect them.
There's so many that
Right.
we could
Yeah.
do in a whole program. And that's what
Yep.
I tell people too. It's like the odds of you finding a CWD one are pretty rare.
Right.
I don't know have you dealt with any EHD situations in your work?
I haven't here in Wapaka County. Back when I was a warden for a couple years in Montana, we had a pretty bad EHD outbreak. Yeah, which that can, I would say, maybe not as long-term as CWD, right, ongoing year after year, but when that, I'm sure as you know, the blue tongue or EHD, it cuts a swath.
Kentucky, Indiana this year, Illinois, Missouri, they got drilled. Some of those places and that takes out entire age classes of bucks.
Totally.
Okay, let's talk about a couple more things. Shooting hours. Gun season comes.
Yeah.
Shooting hours it's very specific.
Yeah.
We got it down to the minute. How do you deal with those situations where, kerpow, there's a shot 30 minutes before light?
Sure. Yeah.
Are you out there listening? Are you waiting for people to call, or how does that work?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. We're certainly out, usually well before light and frankly well after light, listening. As I said earlier, there's only so many of us, so we can't be out everywhere all at once, of course. So largely leaning on, our customers, our community to be our eyes and ears and report that to us, which right.
How do you go about like busting a guy for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it depends. And you're seeing that I answer a lot of these questions probably.
I know you're a classic. I don't want to say a classic government employee, but you make a good politician.
Sure, very good, very good. Thank you, Dan. I would say it depends in the sense of, is this something based on the call we got, we have a person or we have a very specific spot, or we'll get the call of this happened, 500 yards or within a quarter mile of me.
Okay.
Right, exactly. So in the case that we have a very specific person, some likely deer that were shot, very specific information, we want to deal with it like anything as soon as possible. We'll go and figure out, what was going on, who was in that area, and then we find a person of interest, if you will. We'll go and talk with them about it, and oftentimes, especially them knowing that so many other people are out, especially opening weekend, they'll usually, come around pretty quickly on that. Otherwise, if it's one of those deals where I heard it within a quarter mile, but I think it was east of here, a lot of times then what we'll do is lightning strikes twice, if you will. We'll be working in the area, and a lot of folks have, again, the habit of, like you said, the hunting or shooting hours now are very clear. They're in the regulations. They're online. But there is still certainly that element of, I hunt till I can't see my sights anymore. Yep. So that being said, oftentimes we'll find repeated issues, the same person, except
gotta
now
be
when we're
hard,
closer
though.
to
I
them.
mean, that's got to be really difficult.
Yeah,
even if
it can be.
Even if it was like, again, go back to the example of you and I are neighbors. Jonathan shot 10 minutes after shooting light or before shooting light.
Yeah.
Okay, now you go over there.
Yeah.
Jonathan, the warden, goes over there. Hey, we heard a shot and it was well before shooting light. Guy said, well, no, I shot it. How do you prove it? Unless he admits it.
Yeah, I would say we largely lean on that and people's cooperation, as well as, frankly, our interview background. Just as far as
so
the
you're
questions
you're like
we...
a CSI guy. Like
Well,
you kind of got to do that, like good cop, bad cop.
Sure, yeah,
get him to admit it.
we have all kinds of different...
Come on, you shot it. Come on.
Right.
All right, I did.
Yeah, well, and frankly, and not to get off on a tangent, but I think a big part of our job as wardens, and I think this is very nationwide, is that while we are very much the patrol officer, patrol deputy, if you will, of our DNR, fish and game agencies, we're also largely the kind of first-line investigators or detectives, too. So it adds a fun element to the job that some cases get longer or more involved, if you will, as well as we really do focus a lot on, interviewing, evidence collection, analyzing different things like that.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it can be.
And it
can
probably
be.
lands you in court sometimes.
It certainly does. Yep, it does.
People fighting it or...
Yeah.
Like
but
that.
like anything else in the world of law enforcement, and frankly, our justice system in general, whether on a local, state, or federal level, that's part of the country we live in.
Yep.
So, the court process certainly is something we get brought into fairly often.
It is fascinating. Let me see how much time I'm
Yeah.
going to try to get to. We already talked about that.
Sure.
Okay, here's another example. Legal bucks here needed a 3-inch antler. How many times have you confiscated a deer that didn't have a 3-inch antler?
It depends. So I would say, you never heard me answer it that way before, right? It depends in the sense that we run into it, I would say, quite a bit less now that we don't have the in-person registrations that we used to have, and I understand some states still do.
I don't know of any. Nebraska just did. Theirs is slick, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
They just went to telecheck. It's ours is easy.
Sure.
Theirs is more
really.
even
We're
easier.
all ears.
Yeah, it's kind of like ours, but it's very sweet.
Cool.
It was like 30 seconds.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
very nice.
Okay. Cool.
Anyways, so we have telecheck or whatever you want to call it. And was it a 3-inch buck? Yes, it was, but it wasn't. So you're probably not dealing with that situation at all?
Yeah, I wouldn't say too often. Again, I'll clarify my it depends, is that oftentimes we will have people who had good intentions. They were looking, the deer's ears were up. It was a long ways away. Whatever the reasoning was, they shoot it thinking it was a doe, walk up to it. Say during one of our antlerless only seasons, or they already shot a buck, walk up to it and have that, oh, darn it moment. And they, what we call self-report. They call themselves in, they own up to it, which quite frankly, whether it's that or anything else, myself included, right, Dan, we're all humans. We all make mistakes. I can say that if someone genuinely makes a mistake, whether it's shooting, a small buck with over that 3-inch antler that they didn't have a license for, a season wasn't open, forgot to register a deer, I always say as long as a warden's not knocking on your front door and you self-report, we are going to reward that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, we want to work with folks on that. So in that
you guys
case,
aren't being hardline on like, nope, sorry, I got to go take that 40 pounds of venison out of the freezer.
Right, correct. Yeah, in those cases,
that's pretty cool.
It'll either be left with them or, again, state law doesn't I shouldn't say necessarily. State law doesn't allow us to allow someone to possess a deer. The deer will get used one way or another. Right. On the flip side, the other end of the it depends is that oftentimes we will have folks register those deer knowingly as does or antlerless deer, and through a variety of different means, word of mouth, whatever it is, pictures, it
Facebook
comes to
posts,
light.
Yeah.
Well, then, again, like anything, whether it's myself as a parent or as a warden, hey, you were trying to hide this. You were trying to be dishonest. Obviously, a different story.
What about velvet deer? Because I know you legally can't possess them, but a guy shoots one in September with archery, or it might be a hermaphrodite that you're running into in November. What happens in those situations?
Yeah, and we've definitely lightened up the laws as far as possession on those different things. And again, it's not quite as common here, I'm sure, as with when our season starts. Versus
pretty rare, but it does happen.
It does happen, versus the Montanas of the world, where like September 1st, Wyoming, correct, in those cases, we've laxed up the laws where generally people can possess them, or, worst case scenario, depending on what it is, if things were otherwise legally harvested or found, we get lots of calls about spotted fawns found dead in the spring.
Yep.
We're able to get people possession tags for that. So there's ways to work through it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Have you, we just saw one here a couple weeks ago. We saw a spotted fawn.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was wondering, has that been changed as well? Or is that a situation where, like you said, it's going to have to be like, hey, listen, that would have been late October.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you would, but like somebody shoots a spotted fawn,
sure,
which can happen.
Yeah, it can. Or we have ag damage hunts or any number of things. Yep.
They could possess that.
Yes.
I'm just thinking like somebody wants to get it mounted. I've seen some that where people have had them mounted. They can actually do that.
Yeah, generally speaking, they could in a hunting setting, especially. But when in doubt, give us a call and we'll work through it.
What's the most egregious deer-related poaching incident you ever worked on?
That I ever worked on? Oh, that's a good question. The one that comes to mind right now, and even in the few years that I've been here and going back to Montana, it feels like a guy could write a book. It's one you probably heard of. Unfortunately, one that happened right around here just a couple of years ago, where we had a couple of, again, without naming any names, a couple of individuals who ultimately over the course of 3 to 4 years were found to have shined and shot at, as best they could recall, 60-plus deer, mostly bucks, in mostly a few couple township area here in Wapaka County, a little bit over in Winnebago County, that, again, their bad habits caught up with them, as well as, frankly, that was a success story in the fact that many local landowners, hunters, other people who cared about the resource did the right thing, gave us the call, and the crumb trail eventually led us to where we needed to be.
That was down by Brad's house.
Yeah.
How many did those guys get nailed pretty good with the penalties?
Yeah, yep. I would say it was probably one of our larger court outcomes that we've had in recent memory. The one defendant who now is actually in prison related to some of that case, as well as some other things that happened, got prison time, which in our DNR world really doesn't happen all that often. Was convicted on, I think we ended up charging them with like 75 to 100 different counts. So they got convicted on a whole bunch of those. Obviously, there's some monetary forfeiture.
Was that
some
just
money.
like thrill killing, or
essentially
something more than that?
Yeah, it really, I guess, without getting too far into the weeds, it started, frankly, off of a bet, as well as I think there maybe was some intention to try and get actual meat, which, as we know, is not the right way to go about it.
Yeah.
And eventually just turned into, for lack of a better way of putting it, a bad habit. Thrill killing is what it was. The vast majority of those deer, if they were even looked for or retrieved, went to waste.
How often is, I can't wrap my head around it, but how often is that a poacher driving at night with a rifle, what's in somebody's head thinking that they're going to, poleaxe that thing and drive, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And actually recover it.
Right.
Or are they just not thinking?
I mean, it depends, Dan, right?
Wow.
So like the two we were talking about, they actually did most everything with bows and primarily crossbows, which is how it lasted so long, but also...
was that one with the 60 deer?
Yes, correct. Yeah. Yep, largely bows and crossbows.
Shooting them out of a vehicle?
Yes.
Really?
Yep, which, as you know, we live in a very deer-rich area. Yep.
Really? A regular compound bow?
Largely crossbow, but some bow involved.
I was going to say, a crossbow, I could kind of see that.
Sure.
Driving around a panel fan, whip doors open.
But yeah, we've had it where folks go out in truck beds and shoot them with compound bows. I mean, you name it, we run into it.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. Well, we're gonna have to get you back on, Jonathan,
Sure.
because I want some more of these.
Yeah.
I want some more of these horror
Sure.
stories.
Sure.
Let's just end on a safety note.
Yeah.
Has the deer hunting woods become safer since you've been working, or is it about the same? And what are some of the most common things that people are messing up on and getting injured?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good question. I am proud to say that largely we are becoming a safer state, and I would like to think, nationally we're seeing that as well. Just people being more safe overall. Obviously, the prevalence of hunter safety programs, the great cadre of instructors we have statewide, as well as an influence that we, put on safety, both as well, education as well as enforcement. Quite frankly, we definitely will lean more towards enforcement action in many safety cases because we want to make sure that we're addressing those things that people would expect us to. Unfortunately, there will inevitably be some incidents that come up, hopefully not too severe, hopefully not fatal.
Gun-related?
Yeah,
bow-related?
I would say the vast majority are firearm-related.
Firearm-related,
Yep.
as opposed to tree stand accidents?
Yeah, yep. I would say while we have quite a few tree stand accidents, we don't here in Wisconsin actually track those specifically. We do get a lot of calls about them, to the local sheriff's or police department. But yeah, I would say the vast majority are firearm related. And honestly, Dan, it comes down to the 4 simple rules we have here in Wisconsin. Tab K, treat every firearm like it's loaded. Always point your muzzle in a safe direction. And that's what I'll say around when people contact or talk with us, right? They get pretty excited and muzzles can get pointed in the wrong direction. So a quick verbal reminder usually changes that. Be sure of your target and what's beyond, and of course, keep your finger outside the trigger guard. Again, following those 4 simple rules, Dan, will avoid 99% of these incidents.
Well,
really.
I'm glad to hear that it's getting safer.
Yep.
That's something we've preached a lot, and especially with the tree stand safety as well.
Yeah.
Are you going to get a chance to hunt yourself yet?
I sure hope so.
Nice.
It'll be a very busy weekend. Probably won't be out opening weekend, moving forward, but yeah, I try to get out when I can, both balancing, like I said before, work and family life. But it helps rejuvenate us, right? Being out in the woods.
That's right.
So yeah, I hope so.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for joining us again.
For sure. Thank you.
We really appreciate those insights, and I hope everybody picked up a little bit here as far as not only what it's involved with being a conservation officer, but also, that these guys are not out to get you.
Right.
He is pretty friendly. I can't see this guy raising his voice, but
Spread the word.
He's got the equipment to show that he can back it up. So for Jonathan Kaiser, I am Dan Schmidt. Thank you for joining us for Deer Talk Now. Again, just like and subscribe. That's all we ask you to do. And we'll catch you next Thursday for another episode of Deer Talk Now.